There's a paper in the journal Geophysical Research Letters, Volume 18, 1991, that describes something that should have changed how people think about Antarctica. Kimberly Meeker and her colleagues at the Mount Erebus Volcano Observatory had found that a volcano at the bottom of the world was condensing gold directly from volcanic gas into crystalline particles and emitting them into the atmosphere. 80 grams a day, every day. In a decade of global aerosol sampling, elemental gold particles were found nowhere else on Earth. Nowhere. Only in Antarctic air. The paper is real. The journal is peer-reviewed. The NASA Earth Observatory confirmed it. The Wikipedia entry cites the same source. I found it 3 months ago while looking for something else entirely, and I cannot explain why it took me this long. There's a volcano at the bottom of the world that rains gold. Not metaphorically, not as trace contamination. Crystalline, elemental gold, real particles, up to 60 micrometers wide, drifting out of a crater on Ross Island, Antarctica, every single day. 80 grams of it, more than 2.5 ounces, scattered across 1,000 kilometers of ice by the wind. And I genuinely cannot explain why I didn't know that until 3 months ago. I found it the way I find most things, sideways. I was looking into the history of early Antarctic exploration, trying to understand why so many of the 19th century expeditions came back with stranger accounts than the history books summarize. A footnote led me to a 1991 paper in Geophysical Research Letters, a peer-reviewed journal. And there it was. Kimberly Meeker and her colleagues at the Mount Erebus Volcano Observatory had discovered something that in any other context would have been major news. Mount Erebus was condensing gold from volcanic gas into crystalline particles and emitting them into the Antarctic atmosphere. In a decade of global aerosol sampling, elemental gold particles were found nowhere else on Earth. Nowhere. Only in Antarctic air. I checked the citation. I checked it again. I found the NASA Earth Observatory confirmation. I found the Wikipedia entry, which cited the same paper. The facts were real. The indifference was also real. Most people who've ever been curious about Antarctica have never heard this. That's when I started pulling on the thread. And I haven't been able to stop. Because here's what I kept finding. The real Antarctica, the one documented in peer-reviewed journals and official scientific reports, is stranger than anything the conspiracy theorists have invented about it. Every layer I pulled back revealed something more extraordinary underneath. Active volcanoes beneath miles of ice. Warm caves where life grows in temperatures you could survive in a t-shirt. A lake the size of Lake Ontario, sealed so completely for 15 million years that it predates the human genus. An underground river longer than the Thames, draining a hidden watershed the size of 2 countries. A mantle, plume generating heat comparable to Yellowstone, sitting beneath ice sheets that cover a mountain range the size of the Alps. All of it documented, all of it verified, all of it sitting on a continent governed by the only international treaty in history that freezes all territorial claims indefinitely, designates the entire landmass as a natural reserve and requires a special permit just to enter certain zones. I'm not here to tell you what that means. I'm not sure I know, but I kept finding the facts, and the facts kept making the questions louder. Mount Erebus has been continuously active since at least 1972. It stands 3,794 meters above sea level on Ross Island, 77 degrees south, closer to the pole than almost anything humans have built. One of only 5 persistent lava lakes on Earth sits in its crater, a convecting pool of magma roughly 250 meters wide, churning like something alive. James Clark Ross discovered it on January 27, 1841, while commanding HMS Erebus during the British Antarctic expedition. His journal entry is precise and astonished in equal measure. He described a mountain 12,400 feet above sea level, emitting flame and smoke. At first he thought it was snowdrift, until they drew close enough to see what it actually was. A volcano, actively erupting at the bottom of the world. Ross named it after his ship, a ship named after the Greek god of darkness and shadow. For the next 150 years, Erebus was studied primarily as a geological curiosity, a monitoring problem for the handful of scientists stationed nearby. Then, in 1991, the Meeker paper changed something. It established that Erebus wasn't just active, it was chemically unusual in a way nobody had predicted. The volcano emits significant quantities of halogens, hydrochloric acid, hydrofluoric acid, along with lead, mercury, arsenic, copper, zinc, and gold, crystalline gold, condensed directly from vapor phase into solid particles, something that had never been documented at any other volcano on Earth. 80 grams a day, every day. Over 50 years of confirmed continuous activity, that's roughly 1,460 kilograms of gold particles dispersed across the Antarctic ice sheet and the surrounding ocean. Over geological time, Erebus has been active for much longer than 50 years. The deposits become a different kind of number entirely. I don't know if anyone has surveyed for them. I couldn't find evidence that anyone has. But the gold is almost a footnote to what was discovered underneath it. In September 2017, a team led by Dr. Ceridwen Fraser at the Australian National University published a study in Polar Biology. The subject was the cave systems beneath Mount Erebus, extensive tunnels hollowed out by volcanic steam running under the surrounding ice sheet. Inside those caves, the temperature reaches 25 degrees Celsius, 77 degrees Fahrenheit, warm enough to be comfortable in a t-shirt, under the ice at one of the coldest places on Earth. The team took soil samples. They ran forensic DNA analysis. They found traces of algae, mosses, small invertebrate animals, the kind of life you'd expect in a temperate environment, not at the South Pole. Some sequences could be fully identified, others couldn't. Not identified with confidence, not matched to known databases. Potentially new species, the authors wrote, careful with their language in the way scientists are when they've found something they're not entirely sure how to characterize. Dr. Charles Lee, one of the co-researchers from the University of Waikato, was slightly less guarded. We don't yet know just how many cave systems exist around Antarctica's volcanoes, or how interconnected these subglacial environments might be. It is now 2026. Almost 9 years have passed since that paper. I searched for the follow-up study, the one that went back with cameras, with probes, with clean sampling equipment, with the determination to find out whether something was actually living in those caves. I found papers about Erebus's gas emissions. I found papers about its seismic activity. I found the BedMap 3 terrain data published in March 2025, which is the most detailed map of Antarctica's hidden landscape ever produced. I couldn't find the follow-up study. Here's what BedMap 3 revealed, if you haven't seen it. The British Antarctic Survey published it on March 12, 2025, incorporating 82 million data points on a 500-meter grid. It is the most detailed map of any hidden continental landscape in scientific history. Under the ice, an unnamed canyon in Wilkes Land, where the ice is 4,757 meters thick. An entire mountain range, the Gamburtsev Mountains, roughly 1,200 kilometers long, buried under kilometers of ice. The deepest land canyon on Earth, the Denman Trough, 3,500 meters below sea level, deeper than any point on the ocean floor, visible from the surface. Total ice volume, 27 million cubic kilometers. Potential sea level contribution if that ice were to melt, 58 meters, and 138 subglacial volcanoes beneath the West Antarctic Rift System. Of those, 91 had never been described before the 2017 study that identified them. 91 volcanoes nobody knew existed. I kept thinking about what would happen if this landscape was somewhere accessible. If the Gamburtsev Mountains were in Scandinavia, or the Denman Canyon were in the Pacific, they would be the most studied geological features on Earth, the most visited, the most photographed. Instead, the most detailed map of the place didn't exist until 9 months ago. Sometimes I pause at this point and ask myself if I'm simply doing what humans do in pattern seeking, in random complexity, finding significance in coincidence, deciding that unusual means suspicious. Antarctica is remote. Antarctica is cold. Antarctica is logistically brutal in a way that no other research environment on Earth approaches. Maybe the reason nobody has gone back into those caves is the same reason nobody has mapped the subglacial terrain until 2025. It's just hard. Extraordinarily, prohibitively hard. Maybe. And then I look at what else is down there. In 2022, a team from Imperial College London, the University of Waterloo, and Newcastle University published their findings in Nature Geoscience. They had discovered a subglacial river beneath the Antarctic ice sheet, 460 kilometers long, longer than the Thames, collecting meltwater from a drainage basin that covers an area roughly the size of Germany and France combined, channeling it beneath 2 kilometers of ice before emptying into the ocean. Nobody had known it was there. The year before that, NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory confirmed what geophysicists had been arguing about for decades: a mantle plume beneath Marie Byrd Land, a narrow column of superheated rock rising from deep in the Earth's interior. The plume generates heat flux of up to 150 milliwatts per square meter. Yellowstone, the most famous geothermal feature in North America, generates approximately 200. Normal continental crust generates between 40 and 60. Antarctica is not normal continental crust. Helene Cerusi, the JPL researcher who led the mantle plume study, said something I keep returning to. When her models first produced results suggesting that much heat beneath that much ice, her reaction was, "I didn't see how we could have that amount of heat and still have ice on top of it." The ice is still there. The heat is also there. Both things are true. The question of why they coexist is an active area of research, and beneath all of it, over 400 confirmed subglacial lakes, pockets of liquid water trapped between the bedrock and the base of the ice sheet, kept liquid by geothermal heat and the pressure of kilometers of ice above them. The largest is Lake Vostok. Lake Vostok is 250 kilometers long and 50 kilometers wide. Its surface area is approximately 12,500 square kilometers, roughly the size of Lake Ontario. Its maximum depth approaches 1,000 meters. Its volume ranks it among the 6 largest lakes on Earth by water volume. The ice above it is between 3,750 and 4,000 meters thick. It has been sealed, completely isolated from the surface world, for at least 15 million years, possibly longer. On February 5, 2012, a Russian team completed a borehole 3,768 meters deep through the ice above Lake Vostok and made contact with the lake's surface. The ice core they brought up contained bacterial DNA. Some sequences matched known organisms, others didn't. Analysis halted due to contamination concerns. The lake that has been sealed for 15 million years, sealed since before the emergence of the genus Homo, since before the Tibetan Plateau reached its current elevation, since before the Mediterranean Sea came into existence in its modern form, that lake has been physically reached exactly once. A single borehole, a single contact, samples that couldn't be fully analyzed. A 2025 study identified 85 previously unknown active subglacial lakes beneath the ice, bringing the total of confirmed active lakes to 231. No one, to my knowledge, has returned to Vostok. Now, let me tell you about Tartary, not the conspiracy theory, the real thing. For roughly 6 centuries, European cartographers used the term Tartaria to designate an enormous, only vaguely understood region stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific. Abraham Ortelius included it in the first modern atlas in 1570. Jodocus Hondius mapped it in 1606. Guillaume Delisle, France's premier géographe du roi, published a detailed Carte de Tartarie in 1706. It's in the Library of Congress right now, digitized, accessible to anyone. The Encyclopaedia Britannica was still publishing entries on it in its 9th and 11th editions. Tartary was real, not as a unified political entity. It was never that. But as a genuine geographic designation for territory that European knowledge had categorized, but not fully explored, not fully mapped, not fully understood. It existed on the best maps of the world as a named space over something that remained substantially unknown. Around 2016, an internet-native conspiracy theory began inflating Tartary into something else entirely, a lost global civilization, a hidden empire, an erased history. The Russian Geographical Society has called it an extremist fantasy. The academic consensus is unambiguous. There is no historical connection between the real Tartary of the maps and any hidden civilization. The theory requires fabricating evidence that doesn't exist. But the method is worth examining. Because the method is this. Take a real geographic term from real historical maps. Find genuine gaps in the official account. Point to things on the maps that don't fit the conventional narrative. Ask questions the official history doesn't satisfyingly answer. And then, this is where it goes wrong. Fill those gaps with invented answers instead of sitting with the discomfort of genuine uncertainty. The alternative historians who inflated Tartaria into a conspiracy looked at the same maps I'm looking at. They found the same gaps, they just couldn't stop at the question. They needed the answer, even if they had to manufacture it. Antarctica has its own version of this, because if you read the actual first contact accounts, not the conspiracy versions, the real primary sources, you find something genuinely strange. James Clark Ross, sailing into what would become the Ross Sea in January 1841, described breaking through dense pack ice into completely open water. Not a particle of ice could be seen from the masthead, he wrote. He had expected more ice. He found an open ocean. He described it as entirely unexpected. 3 days later, he found a volcano actively erupting. 1 day after that, he found the Great Ice Barrier, a cliff of ice 200 feet high, extending across his entire horizon, flat on top, stretching as far as he could see in either direction. He compared it to the cliffs of Dover, a continent that had been depicted on European maps for 300 years before anyone saw it. Not because anyone knew it was there, but because ancient geography required a southern counterweight to balance the northern land masses. The theoretical southern continent appeared in Ptolemy, in Aristotle, on virtually every world map from the 15th through 18th centuries. They called it Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. And when explorers finally went looking, they found it, more or less where the theory said it would be. What they found wasn't what the theory predicted. It wasn't temperate. It wasn't habitable. It wasn't anything the cartographers had imagined. It was ice and rock and a cold that defies description. But it was there. The Piri race map of 1513, drawn by an Ottoman admiral from approximately 20 source maps, including a lost Columbus chart, shows a southern landmass that alternative historians have spent decades arguing depicts an ice-free Antarctica. The mainstream consensus, established most thoroughly by Gregory Mackintosh in his exhaustive 2000 study, is straightforward. The southern landmass on the Piri race map is Terra Australis Incognita, the theoretical construct. It doesn't accurately depict Antarctica's coastline. It's connected to South America without a break. The longitude errors run to 15 degrees. It is a theoretical landmass, not a survey. But here's what strikes me. For 3 centuries, European civilization maintained, on its best and most trusted maps, a detailed depiction of a continent nobody had seen, based on theory, based on the felt requirement that the world must balance itself. And then, when explorers finally went south, they found a continent, not the one on the maps, but a real one, stranger than the one they'd imagined. The theory was wrong. The intuition was right. I keep thinking about that structure, the persistent feeling that something was there, the maps that tried to capture it before anyone had the instruments to know, the reality that turned out to be stranger than the speculation. The Antarctic Treaty was signed on December 1st, 1959, in Washington, D.C., and entered into force on June 23rd, 1961. 12 nations signed it, including the United States and the Soviet Union, two countries that agreed on almost nothing else during that decade. Today, 58 nations are party to it. The treaty dedicates the entire continent south of 60 degrees south latitude to peaceful purposes and scientific research. Article 7 grants designated observers complete freedom of access to any area of Antarctica at any time. All stations, all equipment, all ships, all aircraft subject to inspection. And yet, 72 Antarctic specially protected areas require a permit for entry. The Madrid Protocol, signed in 1991, imposes an indefinite ban on all mineral resource activities. Article 4 of the original treaty freezes all territorial claims permanently. 7 nations had claims, and all 7 agreed to put them in suspension indefinitely. Tourists can visit, more than 100,000 did last austral summer, but ships carrying more than 500 passengers may not land passengers. I want to be precise here, because this is where careful thinking matters. The treaty is not secret. It's not restrictive in any way that defies explanation. Antarctica is ecologically fragile, scientifically irreplaceable, and situated at a geopolitical intersection where unmanaged competition could become genuinely dangerous. The restrictions are reasonable. They make sense. What I find myself returning to is not the restrictions themselves, it's the specific timing. The treaty was negotiated and signed in 1959, at the height of Cold War competition, in the immediate aftermath of 2 major military operations, Operation High Jump in 1946-47, which deployed 13 ships, 33 aircraft and 4,700 personnel, and Operation Deep Freeze beginning in 1955, which established the permanent American presence on the continent. The 12 original signatories agreed with unusual speed and unusual unanimity to put aside all competing claims and share everything. In 1959, when the United States and Soviet Union were arguing about everything else, I have no claim to make about what produced that agreement. I genuinely don't. What I have is a timeline, and the timeline has a shape. Here is the sequence, as I found it. 1773, James Cook becomes the first person to cross the Antarctic Circle. He never sees land. His verdict, the territory to the south, will never be explored. He came within 75 miles of the continent. 1820, 3 separate expeditions from 3 separate nations sight the Antarctic continent within weeks of each other. 1841, Ross breaks into the Ross Sea, finds open water where he expected ice, discovers an active volcano and charts the Great Ice Barrier. No unusual terrain beyond the open water is recorded. 1938 to 1939, Germany sends an expedition to Antarctica to secure whaling grounds. Their aerial photographs cover roughly 600,000 square kilometers of coastline. They discover the Schermacher Oasis, a region of exposed rock and lakes in an otherwise ice-covered landscape. They name an area of the continent Neuschwabenland. Airdropped aluminum claim markers were never recovered. 1946 to 1947, Operation High Jump, 13 ships, 33 aircraft, 4,700 personnel. The operation ends early, attributed to approaching winter conditions and heavy ice. 1955, Operation Deep Freeze begins. McMurdo Station established. The permanent American footprint on the continent is set. December 1st, 1959. The Antarctic Treaty is signed. All territorial claims frozen. 1959 to 1964. Soviet scientist Andrei Kapitsa conducts seismic soundings during expeditions to the continent and finds what the data suggests is a large body of liquid water beneath 4 kilometers of ice. 1991. Mika et al. Publish the gold dust paper. Nobody changes what they're doing. 1993. Lake Vostok is confirmed by satellite radar. February 5th, 2012. Russian team reaches the surface of Lake Vostok. DNA recovered. Analysis halted. September 2017. ANU team publishes warm cave findings with unidentified DNA. Dr. Lee notes, we don't know how many cave systems exist. November 2017. NASA confirms a mantle plume beneath Marie Byrd Land, generating Yellowstone comparable heat. October 2022. A 460-kilometer subglacial river is discovered. March 2025. Bedmap 3 publishes the first detailed map of the hidden continent. Each step, considered alone, has a reasonable explanation. Taken together, the sequence of discovery, suppression of follow-up, delayed mapping, early militarization, rapid international treaty, the shape of the timeline keeps asking me something I don't have a clean answer for. Not coincidence, pattern. 7 questions I can't resolve. I don't expect you to resolve them either, but I can't stop asking them. If Mount Erebus has been emitting 80 grams of gold daily for at least 50 years, and gold particles have been detected 1,000 kilometers from the crater, what has been deposited across the Antarctic ice sheet over geological time? And has anyone with the capacity to survey for it done so? The ANU team found DNA sequences in Erebus's warm caves that could not be matched to any known species database in 2017. 9 years have passed. Why is there no published follow-up study documenting what is actually living in those cave systems? Lake Vostok has been sealed for 15 million years. A Russian team reached its surface exactly once, recovered bacterial DNA that didn't match known organisms, and stopped. The lake is still down there. The water is still sealed. The organisms, whatever they are still in it. When is the follow-up drilling? Bedmap 3, the most detailed map of Antarctica's hidden landscape, was published in March 2025. It reveals mountain ranges the size of the Alps, the deepest land canyon on Earth, 91 previously unknown volcanoes, a hidden continental topography that would be the most studied terrain on the planet if it were accessible. Why did the most detailed map of this landscape require 2025 to exist? 12 nations signed the Antarctic Treaty in 1959, the United States and Soviet Union among them. 2 countries at the height of their Cold War antagonism over every other piece of contested territory on Earth. What made Antarctica the single place where they agreed quickly and completely to share everything? For 3 centuries, European cartographers depicted a southern continent on their best maps before anyone saw it, not because they had evidence, but because their theory required it. When explorers finally went south, they found a continent. The theory was wrong about what it was. The intuition was right that something was there. What are we theorizing about Antarctica today that the next generation of instruments will confirm is actually down there? And this, if the warm cave systems beneath Mount Erebus are as interconnected as Dr. Lee suggested they might be. If they run beneath the ice in ways we haven't mapped, connecting volcanic heat to sealed water systems to biological communities living in temperatures warm enough for life to thrive. At what point does subglacial cave biology become something that requires a different kind of word entirely? European maps carried a continent called Terra Australis Incognita for 300 years before a single human being saw it. They named it. They drew its coastlines. They debated its extent. And then, when the ships finally went far enough south to resolve the question, the continent was real, just not the one they had imagined. Stranger, colder, more extreme, more hidden. The maps were wrong about what was there. They were right that something was. The best instruments we've ever built are only now beginning to see what's actually under the ice, and what they're finding: the caves, the lakes, the rivers, the heat, the organisms that don't match any database, keeps being stranger than the theory. I don't know what that means. I know I can't stop looking.